The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory in 1878, startling Dexter Kane from his evening meal by the campfire. He'd been trailing a herd north for 3 days, the lonesome journey giving him too much time with memories he'd rather forget. The second shot had him on his feet, Winchester in hand, hat pulled low as he swung onto his dun-quarter horse. In the fading twilight, he could make out the outline of a ramshackle farm half a mile distant, smoke rising from what appeared to be its barn. "Come on, Chance," he urged his horse forward, the animal responding immediately to his touch. At 32, Dexter had seen enough violence in his life to recognize trouble, and something in those shots spoke of desperation rather than hunting. As he approached the weathered farmstead, he slowed Chance to a walk, eyes scanning the property. The main house stood dark and silent, but flickering lights spilled from cracks in the barn's wooden walls. Voices carried on the evening air, angry, threatening male voices punctuated by frightened female ones. Dexter dismounted, tethering Chance behind a stand of cottonwoods. Moving silently with the practiced ease of a man who'd spent years tracking both cattle and men, he approached the barn, Winchester ready. Through a gap in the wall, he glimpsed 3 men, rough-looking types with the hard eyes of those who took what they wanted without asking. They stood over 2 young women huddled against the far wall, both bound at the wrists, their dresses torn and dirty. "Your pa's debts are due," the tallest man snarled, a pistol dangling from his hand. "Since he ain't here to pay, you 2 will do just fine as payment." The boys at the Silver Dollar would pay good money for fresh merchandise. One of the sisters, the elder, Dexter guessed, raised her chin defiantly. "Our father will kill you when he returns." The man's laugh was cold. "Your father ain't returning, girl. That stage he was on met with an unfortunate accident yesterday. Now, nobody knows you're here except us, and by tomorrow, you'll be headed to California with new names and new occupations." Dexter had heard enough. He'd seen human trafficking during his years as a Texas Ranger before the war, had fought against it, had lost people to it. Something old and fierce rose in his chest as he moved to the barn door. The first man never saw the blow coming. The butt of Dexter's Winchester connecting with his skull dropped him without a sound. The second managed to turn before Dexter's boot caught him in the chest, sending him crashing into a stack of hay bales. The leader, the one with the gun, whirled and fired, the bullet splintering wood inches from Dexter's head. He kept his movements slow and deliberate, aware that to these young women, he was just another man with a gun. "My name's Dexter Kane," he said, setting his rifle down and pulling his knife to cut their bonds. "I was passing by and heard the shots. I'm not here to harm you." The older sister watched him with wary green eyes. She couldn't be more than 22, with auburn hair falling in tangles around a face that, despite the dirt and fear, held both beauty and fierce determination. The younger girl, perhaps 18, clung to her sister, blue eyes wide with terror. "I'm Hannah Vance," the older one said after a moment. "This is my sister Eleanor. These men, they killed our father." Dexter nodded gravely as he cut through the ropes binding their wrists. "I heard. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Vance." As the ropes fell away, he met her gaze steadily. "You'll never fear another man again. Not while I draw breath." The words came unbidden, a promise he hadn't planned to make. Yet as they hung in the air between them, Dexter knew he meant every syllable. Hannah's eyes widened slightly. "You don't know us, Mr. Kane." "No," he agreed, helping Eleanor to her feet. "But I know what's right. And leaving 2 women alone after what's happened here wouldn't be right." Eleanor spoke for the first time, her voice trembling. "What do we do with them?" She gestured toward the men. Dexter's expression hardened. "We'll tie them up, take them to the nearest marshal." "Where would that be?" "Timberline," Hannah said. "About 15 miles east." Dexter nodded. "First light, then. Tonight, we secure these men, and you gather what you need. I don't reckon you'll want to stay here." Hannah's chin lifted again. "This is our home. And it still can be," Dexter said gently. "But not tonight. Not with these memories so fresh." As he worked to bind and gag the 2 unconscious men, Dexter watched the sisters from the corner of his eye. They moved with the synchronized efficiency of people who'd worked side by side their whole lives, gathering essentials, speaking in half-sentences that required no completion. Their bond was palpable, and he felt a twinge of something like envy for that connection. Some wounds never fully healed. What will happen to us? Hannah's voice was steady, but Dexter heard the fear beneath it. That depends on you, he said. You have family elsewhere? She shook her head. It was just Father, Eleanor, and me after Mother died of fever 3 years ago. Father was going to Cheyenne to secure a loan to keep the farm going through winter. Dexter nodded thoughtfully. After we deal with these men in Timberline, I can escort you to Cheyenne if you wish. Or you could sell the farm, start fresh somewhere else. This land is all we have, Hannah said fiercely. The journey was somber, the women lost in grief for their father, Dexter watching the horizon and planning next steps. Timberline proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings surrounding a crossroads, but it boasted both a marshal's office and a small church. The marshal, a grizzled man named Thorpe with a Civil War limp and shrewd eyes, listened to their story with growing anger. Bowen's gang, he spat when they'd finished. Been looking for these vermin for months. They've been preying on isolated homesteads all through the territory. The townspeople, hearing of the sisters' ordeal, rallied around them with the frontier spirit of community that often emerged in times of crisis. The local boarding house owner offered them rooms at no charge, the general store provided necessities, and several of the town's women brought food and comfort. Through it all, Dexter remained steady and watchful. He had promised to see them safely through this, and he was a man of his word. But as the days passed, he found himself increasingly drawn to Hannah Vance's quiet strength and determination. She grieved, yes, but she also planned, questioned, and prepared. She was not a woman to be broken by tragedy. A week after they arrived in Timberline, Dexter found Hannah sitting alone on the boarding house porch, staring at the street without really seeing it. "Miss Vance," he said, settling into the chair beside her. "You seem troubled." She gave him a small, tired smile. "Beyond the obvious reasons?" "Yes," he said simply. "Something new is weighing on you." Hannah sighed. "I've been going through Father's papers. The farm. It's not just in need of a loan. It's mortgaged to the bank in Cheyenne. Without Father's income from his carpentry work in town, we can't make the payments. We have 3 months before they'll foreclose." Dexter frowned. "How much is owed?" $300 now, another $200 due by winter. It was a substantial sum for homesteaders, nearly impossible to raise quickly. Dexter thought of the money he'd saved from his cattle drives, meant for a small spread of his own someday. It would cover the debt, with little left over. "There may be a way," he said slowly, "but it would require you to trust me further." Hannah turned to face him fully. "Mr. Kane, you saved our lives and have stood by us through the darkest days I've ever known. I think you've earned some trust." Dexter nodded, choosing his words carefully. The Rocking R is still short-handed for the drive to Cheyenne. They'd pay good money for experienced hands. I could return to your farm with you, help get it in order, then join the drive for the final push to Cheyenne. The pay would help with your mortgage. And what would you gain from this arrangement?" Hannah asked, her directness refreshing after years of dealing with people who circled their true intentions. "Room and board while I'm there," he said. "And the knowledge that I've helped see this through." Hannah studied him, searching for hidden motives. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "Eleanor and I can't work the farm alone, not all of it. We were going to have to let the western fields go fallow. With your help, we might salvage something from this season." Dexter held out his hand. "Partners, then, until you're secure." Hannah's hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. "Partners, Mr. Kane." 2 days later, they returned to the Vance farm. The barn had been cleaned of blood, the house aired and restored to order, but the shadow of violence lingered. Eleanor flinched at unexpected sounds, and Hannah's eyes constantly swept the horizon, watching for threats. Dexter worked from sunrise to sunset, repairing fences, tending livestock, and helping bring in what remained of the harvest. The sisters matched his efforts, Hannah working the fields alongside him while Eleanor managed the house and garden. Slowly, a rhythm developed, a partnership born of necessity, but growing into something more comfortable. In the evenings, they would gather on the porch, the Wyoming sunset painting the sky in spectacular colors. Eleanor would often retire early, leaving Hannah and Dexter alone with the emerging stars and their quiet conversations. "You never speak of your life before," Hannah observed one such evening, 3 weeks after their return. "I know you were a ranger, that you fought in the war, but nothing of your family or home." Dexter was silent for so long that Hannah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with disuse. I had a wife, Charlotte. A son, Matthew. A small farm outside of Dallas. When the war came, I joined the Confederate cavalry, not out of any great love for the cause, but because Texas was my home. He paused, the memories washing over him like a physical wave. While I was away, raiders came. Men who used the chaos of war to prey on those left behind. They burned the farm, took what they wanted. Charlotte, she fought back. They killed her for it. Matthew was only 6. He died in the fire. Hannah's sharp intake of breath seemed to echo in the quiet night. Dexter, I'm so sorry. It was the first time she'd used his given name, and somehow that simple intimacy loosened something in his chest. After the war, I tracked down the men responsible. 3 of them. I found 2. He didn't elaborate on what happened when he found them, but Hannah understood nonetheless. And the 3rd? Never found him. After a while, I realized vengeance wasn't bringing them back. So I started driving cattle instead, moving, always moving. Hannah's hand found his in the darkness. Until you heard gunshots from our barn. Dexter turned to look at her, her face silvered by moonlight. Until then, he agreed softly. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. Finally, Hannah stood, her hand slipping from his. Good night, Dexter. Good night, Hannah, he replied, watching her disappear into the house, wondering at the strange peace he felt for the first time in years. The following weeks brought them deeper into autumn, the Wyoming landscape transformed by gold and crimson. And you'll move on, Hannah said. It wasn't a question. Dexter hesitated. In truth, he'd been avoiding thoughts of leaving. These past weeks had awakened something he thought long dead, a sense of belonging, of home. That was the arrangement, he said carefully. Hannah took a step closer. What if I proposed a new arrangement? I'm listening. This farm is too much for 2 women alone, even if we could afford to keep it running. We need a partner, someone with skill and strength to complement ours. Her eyes held his steadily. Someone we trust. Dexter's heart began a slow, heavy beat. Are you offering me a business partnership, Miss Vance? A smile played at the corners of her mouth. Among other possibilities, Mr. Kane. The air between them seemed charged with electricity. Dexter closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. Hannah, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm not a wealthy man. I have nightmares sometimes. I carry scars, inside and out. As do I, she replied softly. I'm not looking for perfection, Dexter. I'm looking for someone who sees strength in vulnerability, who understands loss but chooses hope anyway. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Dexter raised a hand to her cheek. Her skin was warm beneath his calloused fingers. I should court you properly. Take time. Hannah leaned into his touch. We've faced death together. We've rebuilt this farm side by side. I'd say we've had a rather thorough introduction, wouldn't you? The kiss, when it came, was gentle at first, a question asked and answered in the warm silence of the barn. Then it deepened, years of loneliness and longing falling away as they found in each other a harbor after too many storms. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, Dexter rested his forehead against hers. I'll come back to you, he promised. After Cheyenne. Hannah's smile was radiant. I'll hold you to that, Dexter Kane. The cattle drive to Cheyenne was grueling, autumn storms making the trail treacherous and the cattle skittish. But Dexter worked with renewed purpose, the promise of return giving him strength through the long days and cold nights. When they finally reached the railhead and the cattle were sold, he collected his pay with a sense of accomplishment he hadn't felt in years. Before leaving Cheyenne, he had one more task. At the bank, he paid the Vance mortgage in full, using nearly all his savings. The bank manager raised an eyebrow at the transaction. This property has been in arrears for some time, he commented. Are you a relative of Mr. Vance? No, Dexter replied, pocketing the receipt. But I'm planning to be family soon enough. The ride back to the farm took 3 days through increasingly harsh weather. When the familiar outline of the farmhouse finally appeared on the horizon, Dexter felt a surge of emotion he could only describe as homecoming. Chance seemed to sense his eagerness, picking up his pace without prompting. Hannah must have been watching for him. She emerged from the house before he'd even dismounted, Eleanor close behind her. The joy in her face as she ran to him dispelled any lingering doubts he might have harbored. "You're back," she breathed as he swung down from the saddle and pulled her into his arms. "I told you I would be," he replied, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid reality of her in his embrace. That evening, after a reunion dinner that Eleanor had spent all day preparing, Dexter presented Hannah with the mortgage receipt. Her eyes widened as she realized what it meant. "Dexter, this is... How did you?" "I had savings," he said simply. "Enough to clear the debt and give us a fresh start." Eleanor, watching from across the table, smiled through happy tears. "Us?" she echoed. Dexter turned to her. "If you'll have me as part of this family, Eleanor." Dexter tightened his arm around her. "Every word. For as long as I live." She turned in his embrace to face him. "I'm not asking for a protector, Dexter. I'm asking for a partner. Equal in all things." He smiled, tracing the line of her jaw with gentle fingers. "I wouldn't have it any other way. You're the strongest person I know, Hannah Vance. Soon to be Hannah Kane, if you're still offering," she said, a hint of mischief in her eyes. In answer, Dexter reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn velvet box. Inside was a simple gold band with a single small diamond. As Dexter slid it onto her finger, he felt the final pieces of his broken heart mend into something new, not the same as before, but stronger perhaps for having been broken and reforged. They were married in the Timberline Church 2 weeks later, a small ceremony attended by Eleanor and a few townspeople who had supported them through their ordeal. Marshall Thorpe gave the bride away, his gruff exterior softening as he placed Hannah's hand in Dexter's with a warning to treat her right, or answer to me. Winter settled over the Wyoming Territory with fierce determination, snow blanketing the land and transforming the farm into a world of white. But inside the farmhouse, warmth and laughter prevailed. Dexter proved as skilled at indoor repairs as he had been with the fields, reinforcing doors and windows, building new furniture, and adding a sleeping porch for Eleanor to give the newlyweds more privacy. Hannah flourished under the security of their partnership, her natural leadership and intelligence finding new outlets as they planned expansions to the farm. She taught Dexter her father's bookkeeping system, while he shared his knowledge of cattle and horses. Together, they drafted plans for breeding horses as a secondary income to the crops, a combination of their skills that promised greater stability than either enterprise alone. Eleanor, too, found her place in their new family structure. At 18, she was already showing considerable talent with herbal medicine, having learned the basics from their mother before her death. With Dexter's encouragement, she began formal training with the doctor in Timberline, riding in twice a week to study and assist. "You don't mind?" she asked Dexter one evening as they sat by the fire, her medical texts spread around her. "Some men think women shouldn't be doctors." Dexter smiled, looking up from the harness he was mending. "Some men are fools, Eleanor. You have healing hands and a quick mind. The world needs more of both." From her place at the table where she was reviewing seed catalogs, Hannah watched the exchange with a full heart. This man who had come into their lives like a storm had brought not destruction, but renewal. Every day, she found new reasons to love him. Spring arrived with its own challenges: lambing season, planting, and the news that Hannah was expecting their first child. Dexter's reaction to her announcement was everything she could have hoped for. His strong hands shook as he placed them on her still flat stomach, his eyes filled with wonder and a touch of fear. "A child," he whispered. "Our child." Hannah covered his hands with her own. "Are you happy?" "Beyond words," he said hoarsely. "And terrified. What do I know of being a father?" "You know how to love," she said simply. "The rest, we'll learn together." As Hannah's pregnancy progressed, their farm prospered. The horse breeding program began with the purchase of 2 quality mares and arrangements to use the stallion from a neighboring farm. The crops grew strong, and word spread of Eleanor's skill with medicines, bringing people from neighboring homesteads seeking help with everything from fevers to birthing. Summer brought their first foal, a strong colt with promise for the future, and the first significant profits from their harvest. By autumn, Hannah's condition was obvious, her movement slower but her energy undiminished. She continued to work alongside Dexter and Eleanor, adapting her tasks to accommodate her changing body but refusing to be relegated to purely domestic duties. "My mother worked the fields until the day before I was born," she reminded Dexter when he fretted about her exertions. Wyoming women are made of stronger stuff than you think. It's not your strength I doubt, he replied, helping her down from the wagon after a trip to town. It's my ability to bear it if anything happened to you or the baby. Hannah's expression softened. Nothing will happen, but I understand your fear, Dexter. I'll be careful, I promise. Their son, William Thomas Kane, was born on a clear December night in 1879, with Eleanor and the Timberline doctor attending. Dexter paced outside the bedroom door for hours, each of Hannah's cries slicing through him like a physical wound. The infant's face was red and wrinkled, his eyes the unfocused deep blue of all newborns. But to Dexter, he was perfect beyond imagining. William, he murmured, testing the name they had chosen to honor Hannah's father. Welcome to the world, son. As he gazed down at this new life, this miracle born of love found in the aftermath of tragedy, Dexter felt the final ghosts of his past lay themselves to rest. Charlotte and Matthew would always be part of him, their memory honored in his heart. But here, now, was his future. Hannah watching him with love-filled eyes, Eleanor hovering proudly nearby, and William's tiny hand curling instinctively around his finger. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The farm expanded, with additional acreage purchased from a neighboring family moving west. Their horse breeding program gained reputation throughout the territory, with buyers coming from as far as Colorado for Kane stock. Eleanor completed her medical training and established a small practice in Timberline, though she maintained her room at the farm and returned frequently. William grew into a sturdy, curious boy with his father's quiet determination and his mother's quick intelligence. He was joined 2 years after his birth by a sister, Charlotte Eleanor, named for the women who had shaped Dexter's past and present. A third child, James Robert, completed their family 3 years later. By the time William turned 10 in 1889, the Wyoming Territory was preparing for statehood, and the Vance Kane farm had become one of the most prosperous in the county. The original farmhouse had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family and frequent visitors, and the barn that had once been a place of terror was now the center of a thriving horse breeding operation. On warm summer evenings, the family still gathered on the porch to watch the sunset, a tradition maintained through all the changes the years had brought. On one such evening, as the younger children played in the yard and William helped Eleanor identify constellations, Dexter found Hannah's hand in the gathering darkness. "Happy?" he asked quietly, the question a ritual between them. Hannah's answer was as predictable and as necessary as his question. "Beyond measure," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. "And you?" Dexter surveyed his domain, not just the land and buildings, but the people who had become his world. He thought of that night 11 years ago when gunshots had drawn him to this place, of the promise he had made to a frightened young woman. "You'll never fear another man again." A vow fulfilled not just through protection, but through partnership, through the building of a life where fear had no place to root. "I never knew it was possible to be this content," he said, raising her hand to his lips. "Thank you for giving me a home, Hannah, for giving me a reason to stay in one place at last." She turned to him, the last rays of sunset illuminating the auburn still visible in her hair despite the first strands of silver. At 33, Hannah Kane was more beautiful to him than the day they met, her face now carrying the lines of laughter and wisdom that only time could bestow. "Thank you for finding us that night," she whispered. "For being the kind of man who stops for gunshots instead of riding away." Their kiss was interrupted by the children's laughter as James chased a firefly across the yard, Charlotte calling directions from the porch steps. William, now nearly as tall as Eleanor, caught the insect gently in his cupped hands, showing his younger siblings how its light glowed through his fingers. Dexter watched his family, marveling at how full his life had become. From loss and emptiness to this abundance, it was more than he had ever dared to hope for. The path that had led him here was marked with tragedy and pain, but he wouldn't change it, not when it had brought him to this moment, to these people who were his heart. As darkness settled completely over the Wyoming plains and the first stars appeared overhead, Dexter Kane held his wife close and gave silent thanks for gunshots heard on a quiet evening long ago, for courage found in the face of fear, and for the healing power of love that had transformed them all.